أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to welcome you all to our third session on Al-Qawa'id al-Fiqhiyya. If you recall, we were discussing the jurisprudential maxim of qa'idat la tu'ad, the maxim of not repeating. And this is a maxim that is based on an authentic hadith from Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, where he says, قَالَ لَا تُعَادُ الصَّلَاةِ إِلَّا مِنْ خَمْسَةٍ, that the prayer is not repeated unless there is a breach in one of the five areas, in one of these five areas. Al-tahur, purity; al-waqt, the time; al-qibla, the direction of the prayer; al-ruku' was-sujud. If someone performs their prayer and after the salah they discover that there was an error, a mistake that was made, if the mistake is related to these five, the prayer must be repeated. If the mistake or the error is other than these five, then you can benefit from this qa'idah and you don't have to repeat the prayer. Now the question that is asked, now we're going to delve a bit deeper to try to understand the scope of this maxim. When people make mistakes in their prayers, when there's an error in the prayer, it can happen for a number of reasons. Sometimes errors are intentional. Someone intentionally omits a part of the prayer. We call them amid, an intentional error in the prayer. Mistakes can be made because of forgetfulness. Someone is nasi. Mistakes can also be made because someone is ignorant of the ruling. They don't know that this is a part of the prayer or this is a condition of the prayer. So who does this maxim apply to? Does it apply to those who intentionally omit parts or conditions of the prayer? Does it apply to those who forgot, who were forgetful? Does it apply to those who were ignorant of the specific rulings? So we're going to answer these questions to see the scope of qa'idat la tu'ad. So number one, does this maxim include those who intentionally omit parts or conditions of the prayer not included in the list of five? So for example, imagine someone intentionally does not recite tashahhud. Tashahhud is one of the obligatory parts of the prayer. So imagine I perform my prayer and I intentionally do not recite tashahhud. Can I refer to this qa'idah and say, well, tashahhud is not one of the five that is mentioned, and therefore I don't have to repeat my prayer? Can someone who is amid, someone who is intentional, argue that I didn't recite tashahhud? Yes, I omitted it intentionally, but the hadith from Imam al-Baqir says, La tu'adu salah, prayer is not repeated unless there is a breach in the five. And tashahhud is not one of the five. Can this argument be made? The answer is no. So, qa'idat la tu'ad, number one, the maxim of not repeating does not include, it does not apply to someone who intentionally abandons a part of the prayer, like tashahhud. Why? Because if you can omit tashahhud, if you can intentionally omit tashahhud, then it negates the idea that tashahhud is an obligatory part of the prayer. It doesn't make sense to say tashahhud is wajib, but if you intentionally do not recite tashahhud, there's no consequence and you don't have to make up the prayer. That would be a contradiction. So this maxim does not include someone who intentionally abandons a part or condition of the prayer as not being obligatory to repeat, for this would negate the idea that those parts or conditions are obligatory. Furthermore, the expression of la tu'ad, not repeating, refers to someone who believes that they have performed all of the parts of the prayer. So if I know tashahhud is wajib and I intentionally do not recite it, it doesn't apply, because the expression la tu'ad refers to someone who believed that they performed the prayer in its totality with all of its obligatory parts. So there is an agreement among the ulama that this qa'ida, this maxim, does not apply to al-amid, someone who intentionally does not perform one of the obligatory parts of the prayer. Now, the next question is, does qa'idat la tu'ad, does this maxim include someone who is ignorant of the ruling? So for example, going back to the example of tashahhud, let's assume that someone believed that tashahhud was mustahab. They were ignorant. They did not know that tashahhud was a wajib part of the prayer. So if someone is ignorant of the fact that it is obligatory to recite Surah Al-Fatiha or another surah or tashahhud, whatever it may be, does such a person need to repeat past prayers, or does this maxim include them and therefore exempt them from repeating? So imagine someone does not recite tashahhud or taslim because they were ignorant of the fact that this is a wajib part of the prayer. And then they realize that tashahhud or taslim or fatiha or the second surah is wajib. Do they have to repeat, or can they benefit from qa'idat la tu'ad and say, well, tashahhud and taslim and fatiha is not on the list of 5 and therefore I don't have to repeat? Now, there is a discussion among the ulama about whether or not this maxim includes an ignorant person, because there are 2 types of ignorant people. So there is no doubt that the maxim excludes al-amid, someone who intentionally potentially omits an obligatory part of the prayer. And there is a consensus among the ulama that this qa'ida includes, it applies to someone who forgets. Someone forgot to recite tashahhud. Someone forgot to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, and they realize that after the prayer. They don't have to repeat. This maxim applies to them. But how about someone who is ignorant? There are 2 types of ignorant people. So we have to make a distinction here. There are 2 types of ignorant people. There is jahil muqassir, culpable ignorant person. This is someone who is blameworthy. And someone who is jahil qasir, inculpable ignorant person. They are an excused ignorant person. Now, certain fuqaha like Al-Mirza Shirazi were of the opinion that this maxim is only specific to one who forgets. Why? Because the maxim says the prayer does not have to be repeated if there is a breach in 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you say that someone who forgets has to make up the prayer, someone who forgets tashahhud, for example, has to make up the prayer, you are arguing that they are being commanded to repeat. And commanding someone to repeat is basically you're making them mukallaf. They're mukallaf. But there's an agreement among the fuqaha that someone who is nasi, someone who is forgetful, they are not mukallaf in their state of forgetfulness. So he says that this qa'ida can only benefit those who forget. And his evidence is that an ignorant person has in reality not performed that which is obligatory to begin with. So the statement of repeat, if you tell a person repeat, they're gonna do the prayer the same way because they were ignorant of the fact that tashahhud was wajib. So it doesn't make sense to say to an ignorant person, repeat. So Mirza Shirazi says it only applies to a forgetful person. It doesn't apply, so not repeating the prayer only applies to a forgetful person. It doesn't apply to someone who is ignorant. Because if you tell someone who is ignorant, repeat, they're going to do the prayer the same way that they did before, because they don't know that tashahhud is wajib. Rather, what do you say to an ignorant person? You say, recite Fatiha, recite the surah, or recite the tashahhud. You point out the thing that they were ignorant of. So this is different from a person who forgets. So Mirza Shirazi says, you can't tell a person who forgets tashahhud to repeat, because the judgment for them to repeat the prayer happens at the moment that they forget. But at the time of forgetting, it is not possible to direct a taklif, because someone who's forgetful, they're essentially not mukallaf at that moment of forgetfulness. And since he's unable to perform the forgotten act while in a state of forgiveness, he's not commanded to repeat the prayer. The maxim of not repeating applies to him. This is different from a person who is ignorant, as his ignorance will not remove his ability to perform the act. And therefore it is appropriate to address an ignorant person by telling them, repeat the prayer and do this part of the prayer. Now, the author, Sheikh Baqir al-Irawani, the author of the book that we're studying, he says that he doesn't accept these distinctions. He says, based on the previous argument, even a forgetful person, the argument that Mirza Shirazi was making, that someone who is ignorant, who is forgetful, they're not mukallaf. So based on the previous argument, even a forgetful person would not be included. If a forgetful person is not mukallaf, they omit Surah Al-Fatiha, for example, the command repeat would make no sense, because it would apply the existence of a previous command. So here the author is saying that Mirza Shirazi is wrong to say that it doesn't apply to, that the reason why a forgetful person is not commanded to repeat is because they're not mukallaf. Telling them repeat or not repeat implies that there was a previous command. So in fact there was a taklif. So Sheikh Baqir al-Irawani, he argues that such rulings apply to both. Those who are forgetful, they forgot the tashahhud, for example, and it also applies to someone who is ignorant. It applies to someone who is ignorant. Now, does this maxim include both types of ignorant people? There's a difference of opinion. Sayyid al-Khou'i, for example, believed that it only included inculpable ignorant people, jahil qasir, someone who is excused, someone who, for whatever reason, they tried to learn the prayer, but they just missed this one specific ruling. It doesn't apply to someone who is muqassir, someone who is culpable, someone who just didn't bother learning, who just was lazy. This is someone whose ignorance was excused because they did their best and they just missed this specific ruling. They just didn't know, but they made an effort to learn. So Sayyid al-Khou'i believed the maxim only includes inculpable ignorant people, jahil qasir, because the maxim has a tone of offering a concession to those who are excused. Someone might have made an attempt to learn the prayer, but they were misguided, or they just missed a ruling, but they made an effort to learn. So the tone of qa'idat la tu'ad is to offer a concession to those who are excused, like someone who is jahil qasir. The author, Sheikh Baqir Irawani, however, believes that the maxim includes both types of ignorant people, someone who is muqassir and someone who is qasir. Why? He says, because before the prayer, an inculpable ignorant person was certain that his prayer was correct. And someone who was inculpable, also believed that it was correct. So Jahil, Qasir, and Muqassir, they were under the assumption that their prayer was correct. However, after both, and also both after the prayer, both inculpable and culpable ignorant people are now aware of their mistake. So Sheikh Baqir al-Irawani, he believes that the maxim includes both types of ignorant people, Jahil Qasir and Jahil Muqassir. Why? Because before the prayer ended, both of them assumed that their prayer was correct. And after the prayer ended, they both realized that there was a mistake. So they're both equal. While they're praying, they believe that their prayer is being performed correctly. After the prayer, they both realize that there was a mistake. So they're exactly the same. The only reason, the author argues, the only reason we may exclude Jahil Muqassir, a culpable, a blameworthy ignorant person, someone who is lazy and just didn't bother learning Ahkam al-Salah, is because there is ijma', there is a consensus among the fuqaha that a culpable ignorant person, that Jahil Muqassir, a blameworthy ignorant person, is not included in this concession of not repeating. We mentioned that someone who intentionally does not perform an obligatory part of the prayer is not included in the maxim of not repeating, meaning this qa'idah cannot be used by them. However, there are instances where this qa'idah, the maxim, includes someone who intentionally omits a part or condition of the prayer. So for example, a person prays Salatul Jama'ah behind an individual who they thought was adil, but then later on they discover that this person was corrupt. When you pray Jama'ah behind an imam, you intentionally do not recite Surah Al-Fatiha because you put that burden on the imam. So here, the person who's praying intentionally did not recite Surah Al-Fatiha. Later on, they discover that this person was fasiq. He was not qualified to be an imam. In this instance, even though the person intentionally did not recite Surah Al-Fatiha because they were praying in Jama'ah, and that prayer was later, it was later discovered that that imam was corrupt, they don't have to repeat the prayer. Here, the maxim of qa'idat la tu'ad benefits them. Another example where qa'idat la tu'ad can benefit someone who intentionally does not recite an obligatory part of the prayer. If a person is praying furada individually and is in the second rak'ah, you should recite Fatiha and another surah, but mistakenly assumes that it's the third rak'ah and recites at-tasbihatul arba'a instead of Fatiha and the other surah, their prayer is also valid, even though they intentionally did not recite Surah Al-Fatiha and the other surah. So again, there are certain examples where al-amid, someone who intentionally does not do an obligatory part of the prayer, is exempt. If a person offers jama'ah prayer behind an imam, but later discovers that the imam was offering a mustahab prayer, again, you're praying jama'ah, so certain parts of the prayer, you're not reciting them, you're putting them on the imam. But then you realize that this person was praying nafilah. Again, they can benefit from qa'idat la tu'ad. In this case, even though they're amid, they're intentionally not reciting those parts of the prayer, these are examples where al-amid is exempt and they can benefit from qa'idat la tu'ad. Does this maxim apply only to those who have completed their prayer, or does it apply to those who are in the middle of offering the prayer? So imagine you didn't recite Surah Al-Fatiha and another surah, or you didn't recite the second surah, and you're in the fourth rak'ah. Does this apply to someone who is in the middle of the prayer or someone who finished their prayer? Some fuqaha have argued that it only refers to those who have completed the prayer, because la tu'ad, the expression not repeating, implies that the prayer has been completed. However, Sheikh Baqir al-Irawani, the author, he maintains that the maxim applies to both those who have completed the prayer and those who are in the middle of the prayer, because he argues on the basis of itlaq, that the maxim does not specify whether it's referring to someone who's in the middle of the prayer or after the prayer, and because it has not specified, we can hold on to the absoluteness of the maxim, the itlaq of the maxim. Because if the imam only meant after the prayer, he would have specified. So because it was not specified, we can assume that it is absolute. It applies to in the middle of the prayer and after the prayer. Does the maxim, does qa'idat la tu'ad, only apply to cases where there is an omission? So someone forgets tashahhud. We know that qa'idat la tu'ad can be useful. They can use qa'idat la tu'ad. But does it also include instances where something extra is added to the prayer? So there is no ikhtilaf, there is no dispute among scholars regarding omission. If I offer a prayer, and I forget to recite taslim, or I forget to recite the second surah with Surah Al-Fatiha, and I realize that after the prayer, I don't have to repeat the prayer because of qa'idat la tu'ad. I omitted something from the prayer. What if I add something extra to the prayer? So for example, imagine someone mistakenly recites tashahhud twice. So you are adding something to the prayer. There's ziyada, not naqisa. Is the prayer void? No, the prayer is still valid. So the author says that the maxim includes both omissions and additions. Why? He says because the hadith indicated that a sunnah cannot invalidate a fariḍah. A sunnah means something that was legislated by the Prophet. Tashahhud was legislated by the Prophet. It's not mentioned in the Quran. Fariḍah is the obligatory parts of the prayer that are legislated by Allah. They're mentioned in the Quran. So any mistake that is made, whether it's an omission or an addition, related to something that was legislated by the Prophet, it doesn't make the salah void. The salah is valid and it doesn't need to be repeated. Why are some other important pillars of the prayer like niyyah, takbiratul ihram, etc., not mentioned in this maxim? We know that the prayer has obligatory parts, and among the obligatory parts, there are things that are called arkanul salah. There are 5 arkan of the prayer. Niyyah, takbiratul ihram, al-qiyam al-muttasil bil-ruku', standing right before going into ruku', and sujood. But if any mistake is made in these 5, if someone forgets to recite takbiratul ihram, even forgets, their prayer is batil and they have to repeat it. But qa'idat la tu'ad does not mention takbiratul ihram. It does not mention niyyah. Why is that? The reason is because if someone has not made the intention to pray, no prayer has been performed. So if no prayer has been performed, the command of repeat or don't repeat becomes meaningless, because there was no salah to begin with to say a'id or la tu'ad. It wouldn't make sense to say repeat or not repeat, because there is no salah to begin with. Similarly, takbiratul ihram. Takbiratul ihram is not mentioned in qa'idat la tu'ad, because again, takbiratul ihram, saying Allahu Akbar to commence the prayer, it initiates the prayer. If someone has not recited takbiratul ihram, the prayer has not even commenced. Thus, the maxim does not apply. Why is al-qiyam al-muttasil bil-ruku'? Why is that not mentioned in the maxim? And al-qiyam al-muttasil bil-ruku' is one of the arkan of the prayer. The author believes that this qiyam, the qiyam right before you go to ruku', is actually part of ruku', and therefore the maxim قاعدة لا تعاد implicitly includes it, because you can't have ruku' unless you were first standing and then there's ruku'. So it is implied through the mentioning of ruku' in the five things that are mentioned in قاعدة لا تعاد. Now, one of the things that is mentioned in قاعدة لا تعاد is طهور. لا تعاد الصلاة إلا من خمسة. Number one is الطهور. Now, what is the meaning of purity? That if there's a breach in tahara, you have to make up the prayer. So, what is the meaning of tahur in this maxim? Is this purity referring to tahara min al-hadath? Is it referring to wudu, ghusl, tayammum? Or is it referring to al-tahara min al-khabath, physical purity from physical najasa? There is no doubt that the maxim قاعدة لا تعاد at minimum refers to الطهارة من الحدث. At minimum it refers to wudu and ghusl and tayammum. Meaning, if someone realizes after their prayer that they had not performed wudu, I pray salatul dhuhr and asr, and then after I realize that I didn't even do wudu, the prayer is batil, and you have to repeat it, because this is what قاعدة لا تعاد indicates. The author believes that it is unclear if purity also includes physical purity, الطهارة من الخبث. However, the end of the hadith, the end of قاعدة لا تعاد gives us a clue. Because the end of قاعدة لا تعاد says what? After the Imam says لا تعاد الصلاة إلا من خمسة, and he lists the five, and then he says وَالسُنَّةُ لَا تَنْقُضُ وَلَا تَنْقُضُ السُنَّةُ الْفَرِيضَةِ, that the sunnah does not invalidate a fariḍah. Meaning that if a mistake is made in actions legislated by the Prophet, it does not invalidate what has been legislated by God. So, الطهارة من الحدث is mentioned in the Quran. Wudu is mentioned in the Quran. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم إلى آخر الآية. الطهارة من الحدث is mentioned in the Quran, meaning that it is a sunnah. Okay? So wudu is mentioned in the Quran. طهارة من الحدث is mentioned in the Quran, but purity of body, الطهارة من الخبث, purity of body and clothing, is not mentioned in the Quran. And therefore, this is a part of the prayer that was legislated by the Prophet. And therefore, now some may come and say that no, there is an ayah that speaks about the purity of clothes. Surah 74, ayah number 4, Allah says, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِرْ, and purify your garments. However, this is not a valid argument, because the mufassirin of the Quran, they assert that this ayah refers to general cleanliness. It refers to nadafa, general hygiene, general cleanliness. So, physical purity, at-tahara min al-khabath, is not mentioned in the Quran, and therefore it is a sunnah. And based on this, if someone realizes after the prayer that there was blood on my body, or there was blood on my clothes, and my clothes are najis, the maxim of not repeating can help them. Meaning, you don't have to repeat your prayer, because tahara min al-khabath was a sunnah. It was something legislated by the Prophet, and any mistake made regarding something legislated by the Prophet does not invalidate that which has been legislated by God. Meaning the prayer is valid. It doesn't need to be repeated. Does this maxim help someone who did not avoid an obstacle? So salah has three dimensions. It has shurut, conditions of the prayer, like tahara, like qibla, like waqt. It also has parts, like qiyam, ruku', sujud. And it also has obstacles, things that would disrupt the prayer, things that you have to avoid for your prayer to be valid. So an example of mawani' is praying on ghasbi land, on usurped land. You have to avoid that, otherwise your prayer will be invalid. Laughing during the prayer is one of the mawani'. It's an action that would invalidate the prayer. Now, if someone is praying and accidentally laughs during the prayer, does qa'idat la tu'ad benefit them? It seems that it would. Yes, the maxim applies in such a case, assuming all other conditions and parts are observed, which are legislated by the Prophet. Because again, some of these mawani', these actions that if you do them, they invalidate the prayer, they are sunnah, meaning they are legislated by the Prophet, and they're not legislated by Allah. They're not mentioned in the Quran, and therefore, any mistake made in the sunnah does not invalidate the fariḍah. I'm sorry I had to go a little bit quickly today because I was having some issues with the internet, so I was afraid that it would disconnect. So I think we only have one person in the chat room now. I imagine it's 40 people are busy. So sister, whoever is in the who's attending live, if you have any question or comment, please feel free to pose them now. I'll just leave a couple minutes if you want to type your question or if you want to speak into the mic. Sister Yusra, do you have any question? I hope the material was clear. So alhamdulillah, we have finished qa'idat la tu'ad, the maxim of not repeating. Inshallah, next week we will be discussing qa'idata al-faragh wa tajawuz, which is a very important maxim. It is the maxim of it's actually two maxims, and it's the maxim of finishing, qa'idat al-faragh, and it's related to the prayer, and the qa'idat al-tajawuz, which is the maxim of passing. So inshallah we'll discuss that next week. So alhamdulillah, we finished one of the jurisprudential maxims, and inshallah we'll move on to the next ones next week. Thank you so much, Sister Yusra. Inshallah, I'll be sending you guys the lecture notes, so you guys will have that to refer back to. Please keep me in your dua, and inshallah we will reconvene next week. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin.